Oyez, oyez, oyez. I will call to order the City of Sierra Madre Planning Commission meeting for September 19th. Can we have roll call?
Chair Hutt,
Here.
Vice Chair Dennison, Commissioners Catalano,
Here.
Desai,
Here.
Pevsner,
Here.
and Spears.
Present.
All right, we're having a quorum. We will move to approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So move.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries unanimously. Next, we will move on to the minutes of the September 5th meeting. And does anyone have any comments or corrections?
I have no exceptions.
I have to recuse myself. I was not here.
They look good to me.
Look good to me.
I'll make a motion we approve.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. All in favor?
Aye.
And we have one abstention. Motion carries. Next, we'll move to community input. If there's anybody in the audience that would like to address the commission on an item that's not on the agenda tonight, please come on down. No? Okay. You had your shot. The next item is public hearing, Hillside Development Permit 1501 and Conditional Use Permit 1501. Do we have a staff presentation?
We have a PowerPoint presentation for you this evening. Claire Lynn, our Associate Planner, will be making that presentation.
Is it going to be on those? and
It's
that,
going to
or-
be on all of them.
Okay.
Yeah. I can only see this one.
Use the eyes in the back of your head that your
Yeah.
children are sure you have.
Good evening, chairs and commissioners. The Planning Commission will be reviewing a hillside development permit and a conditional use permit for a property located at 15 Nathaniel Terrace, also known as Lot 7. That is continued from the July 18th meeting. Here is the project location. The project site is a 3.2 acre lot at the end of Nathaniel Terrace. And the applicant is only utilizing the lower triangular portion that's already graded. Area about 7,600 square feet. Applicant has returned with revisions to the plan that address commission's concern. First of all, the project has relocated its footprint 7 feet northwards towards the North LA County Flood Control Access Road. And the architect revised the architectural style to contemporary mid-century modern aesthetic that incorporates low-pitched butterfly roofline with standing seam metal roof. At the underside of the roof, they incorporate architectural details with exposed heavy timber rafters. The project also uses contemporary elements and styles that incorporate clean lines, recessed entrance, narrow frames, open decks, and large walls of glass to provide opportunities to the outside view. Exterior wall finishes will be using horizontal sidings in different width, and hand-trolled smooth stucco applications are carried throughout all elevations. With the revised design, the floor area is reduced to 4,789 square feet. Project information is revised to be consistent with the revised design, with only one correction here is the modification to the north side yard setback. It becomes 4 feet 9 inches, and the commission has approved the modification at the last meeting.
And that setback, just to be clear, is from that,
From the access
from
road.
the access road that it doesn't really mean anything, right?
So
Which
it's
is sort of
already
in the
buffered.
middle of their lot.
Property.
Yeah.
Here's the conceptual site plan. The outline indicated in red was the previous design, and the outline with shaded area shows the current design that's moved 7 feet towards the north and 5.5 feet towards the east. So it stays away from the downward slope. Revised first floor plan, the program remains the same. It's only showing the key map out to the left, the top left, showing the change in footprint. Revised second floor plan actually even step even further back from the proposed design and the lower level to create open decks for all bedrooms and the master bedroom. Basement floor plan remains the same. Proposed roof plan and elevation showing the new butterfly roof line and the recess in second story and the modulations that it steps back further from the slope. Elevations to the north, that is viewing from the access road. And also the west and the east elevation. The west elevation showing the garages all the way back about 115 feet. Here is the sections showing the topography of the slope. Colored section elevation showing the clear story windows and different type of window configurations to provide visual interest, and also the modulation using different materials, the different width in plank for the siding and the stucco. Color elevations of the west and the east elevation. The elevations again. Colors and material board that will be used for this project incorporates earth tone colors. 3D models, the northeast view showing the cityscape. And the different views showing the modulations, how the second story is pushed back. And later on, we do have a 3D model, computer 3D model that we can look at. Photo montage renderings from the street view from the lower, the south access row. Conditional use permit findings and hillside development permit finding has to be made in order to approve the project. Here is the summary of the conditional use permit findings, in that the proposed project is differentiated from the existing historic structures and is consistent with single-family development in the vicinity. And the project has met all the zoning and code requirements. It is consistent with general plan for single-family residential use. The proposed project is on a already graded building pad. The house does not impact the ridgeline view, and it protects the native hillside vegetation. Project will be using earth tone color palette and will be comply to the water efficient landscaping, with only one exception that it meets all zoning regulation, with one exception on the north side yard setback, which it will be amended in the resolution that is on the dais before you. Stone gate design guidelines, that the custom architectural design is respond to the site condition, and the bulk and mass are reduced with breaks in the wall plane and the roof variation. architectural projections, and open decks. The project incorporates single-story elements in the front to provide transition to the two-story massing. The project does use roof on the lower deck to serve as a deck for the upper level. The project uses variety of window configuration to enhance visual interest, and the material that's proposing are doable and low maintenance. So before Planning Commission this evening, the commission can approve the application or approve the application with modification or deny the application, identifying the findings that the commission feels cannot be made and basis for rejecting those findings, or continue the project and provide staff and applicant with further direction. Staff is recommending that the Planning Commission take the following action to approve the hillside development permit and the conditional use permit subject to the conditions of approval. That concludes my presentation, and the applicant has also prepared a PowerPoint presentation as well.
Okay, why don't we get the applicant's presentation first, and then we'll do questions. Thanks.
Good evening, Chair Hutt and Commissioners. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to come back and respond to some of your comments. We did go back, revise the project, and I think it's actually a much stronger project. And I hope that you feel the same way. Since Claire gave a good breakdown of the project, I just want to touch upon some of the key items that we addressed on the project. One of the items that we were asked is to confirm whether the access road was indeed 15 feet in width. Unfortunately, it is, so we have to keep that size. But as part of what we addressed, and one of the major things we did address, was the ability to move the building back into that setback, which what's great that you were able to allow us to utilize that space and bring the house closer to that roadway, since it is indeed still part of the property. The main things we did with the house was this whole portion of the house we moved back onto closer to the access road. It allowed us to push the building back from the top of slope, as well as the kind of the sunken courtyard. What allowed us to do is be able to push this back closer to the building, away from the edge of the top of slope. So now we have a nice flat area here that allows for landscape before we come down to the slope. What we did as well within the sunken courtyard is introduce planters, which helps to minimize the height of the retaining wall when you're inside the basement and looking out. The other thing we also did was make the fence around the sunken courtyard an open fence. So first of all, the impact of the fence is minimized, and also more light is allowed to come down to the basement.
So those planters are raised planters?
Those are raised planters within the courtyard.
So that's going to sort of break up the height?
Break up the tall wall here, which this wall will probably be about 10 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So the planter would be about 2 to 3 feet. And once you have planting, it starts to really soften that wall. So you don't see just a blank wall there. We have another planter here, which softens the stairs. So I think it makes that space, which really is just a small gathering space, not a very active space, and it helps to allow light into the basement. Now showing the diagram of what the previous project plan was, you can see how the garage and this bedroom were really pushed back toward the north, allowing for much more landscape opportunities here, as well as the family room and kitchen were pushed in, allowing the bulk and mass of the house to push away from the edge of the slope, tying it closer to the hillside. And then on the second floor, we did the same. All these spaces moved over to the north, allowing for the secondary bedroom to have a larger balcony here, which really takes advantage of the big, wonderful view this side has. This balcony as well, this bedroom as well. Sorry about that. This bedroom here also has its own balcony, which views out. What's nice about the plan now that these forms stagger, following the contours of the slope, pushing it back, so it should read less from the hillside as you're looking up from below. Also gave us the opportunity for these bedrooms to have the ability for corner glass, which helps to take advantage of the views out toward this area. The master bedroom also has corner windows and deck, which have views as well out to the valley.
Before you move on, could we go
Sorry.
back to that? Yeah. On bedroom 3, there's a little deck in the front, but you see that there's an opportunity for a rather large deck right behind it, which seems sort of a wasted asset.
And it could become a deck. We were orienting the house more towards the big view. I mean, we do have the wonderful mountains behind us, and this could easily become a deck. What we found a little difficult was getting access to the deck from the bedroom. It would affect our bed wall. This allows the bed wall to face out towards the view. If we were to do some sort of access, we would have to probably more than likely do the bed here, which takes away its view from its bed. But we could, I mean, if that's a concern, we can easily do that. I mean, we
Well,
can do a deck.
I can tell you, someone who lives in a house with view, the view is great and whatnot, but sometimes it's nice to also have a sort of more private space. And also the mountains are really cool. And also you can hang out there and not have to worry about, bears coming at you. So it
True.
just seems like an opportunity that's left untouched. Untouched, thank you.
The next slide just shows, again, kind of the outline of the bulk and mass of the building was really pushed back. So now we have a nice break in the two-story form, following the contours of the site, which I think also helps the elevation. Now, in looking at forms, we started looking at similar forms to what we had before, but this is more emphasizing the ability for a butterfly roof, which is a great form that allows for the use of clear story windows, which helps in this case to maximize views. The idea of the glass also helps to give the roof kind of an ethereal effect. It gives us lightness, which is a nice effect. We plan on detailing the underside of the roof so it's visible, since on the uplift portion of the roof you will be seeing that, and have a detail with tongue and groove siding and larger beams. So it really just gives you an idea of the expression these houses can have, and the ability to have these great forms. So in looking at our building, we saw the opportunity for the lower levels, the one-story levels, to be flat roofed, become secondary forms here and here. We did look at the form that There was some concern as to the sloping roof and the wall that used to come out here. We did simplify that and now have a flat roof, and allows us to have the two-story, second-story form be the expressive form with the butterfly roof, the large expanses of glass, being able to take advantage of the views out. Another concern was the fireplace we used to have here, the chimney. There is still a fireplace here, which will be a direct vent fireplace now. And there used to be a fireplace on the upstairs deck, which we eliminated, and it opens up the corner much better. By pushing back the forms, it did give us the opportunity for these larger decks, taking advantage of the view out. And let's see. And let me jump to the next one, I think. One comment that was brought up previously was the fact that at that point we were much closer with the sunken court to the edge of the slope. So there was some discussion about maybe opening that up to take advantage of the view. We were concerned about doing that just because the house would then read much taller. And I think now that the house has been pushed back a little bit more, we'll have some landscape. But this gives you a section and would give you an idea of what it would look like from the slope if we were to open up that sunken courtyard. We would end up reading this mass as a three-story mass. And I think it's be better for the neighborhood if we kept it as a one-story or two-story feel. And here we can see better, this is the form that there was some concern about. We used to have a wall and a sloping roof. We simplified that, and I think it reads better now where all the one-story elements are consistent and a flat roof, secondary masses, and now that two-story roof really becomes kind of the showpiece to the house. And the final item is really the colors. Actually, the colors that we're showing are the same colors we had before, but our renderings failed to show the colors in their true light. They were showing much colder. I think the light color was reading much more white. As you can see here, the colors, this is more true to the color board that we submitted, and they're much more earth tones that will blend nicely into the hillside. I think those were the main items. Definitely will be available for any questions.
I have one question. Regarding the access road, and you mentioned the 15, the 15 feet. That 15 feet is the county's easement, the legal easement for the road, or just the pavement?
It's the easement and the access road as well. They're pretty much the same size.
Okay, so you've established what the legal easement is, and that's, okay, thank you.
Question I had on the roof plan, is the intent to have literally flat roofs, or to have the appearance of the flat roofs on those side volumes?
On those one-story forms,
Yeah, like,
there will be a parapet,
yeah.
and within that we'll have low sloping roofs in order to take care of drainage, but there'll be minimal slope.
But are you doing that for the aesthetic on the exterior, or like why the parapeted flat roofs?
We like the form of just having more of this block or very rectilinear form, as opposed to maybe, I think what you're saying, why don't we roof that area, show the roof? Perhaps?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have some concern on those. One is similar to what John brought up on the garage, but when you have parapets, to get that flat volume, you actually extend the height, because you have, so that was my next question. How tall are those parapets?
The parapets are About 42 inches,
So like 3.5 feet.
right.
Okay.
So they would hide any slope behind it, and it ties into the guardrails to the master deck.
Okay.
You're not putting any mechanical up there, are you?
No, I think we have enough space around the house to
There-
put the,
Yeah, I mean, I'll save my comment after, but I think there's some concern there because it creates added height, you know, in order to just achieve the flat look, you know?
Mhm.
So, anyway, I think there's some issues there. Like, if it's driven by aesthetic, just so it looks like that, and that's the way you're trying to get a flat kind of volume look, there's other ways to do that.
well, we wanted
But
to also
anyway, that's-
tie it into the guardrails for the balcony, so it does follow that height. So it continues this horizontal line across the building.
Yeah, there's always also that weird thing of you have that huge master deck right outside, and when you're out on that deck and you just look over that guardrail, you just see like torch down roof, you know, in that, like, it's just,
Right.
it's like being on top of a commercial building, you know, and you're just like, it I don't know. So anyway, that was my question, but we can address that when we come back.
I mean, that again could also become a deck, and just continue the master deck if that's a concern.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions for staff or the applicant?
Go ahead, Joe. Just to clarify, the garage space is not going to be a deck, or you're having trouble figuring how to get up there? Is that what that was?
We're not proposing it as a deck. Just in terms of layout, we were trying to maximize the view, so we were having an issue just
Where do you
allowing
put
for that door. I mean,
Yeah.
we could probably work it out another way.
Okay. I mean, I just, like you guys, I feel the deck space and the openness and the view makes it, you know, the whole advantage of what you're trying to do with the house.
One quick question. On this north elevation, right above where the master deck is, there's landscape there. Is that in a planter on the deck, or is that like
Behind it.
a planted roof?
Um,
On the north elevation?
Here? Oh,
No.
oh, here.
Yeah, what is that?
I think it's showing some planting in the master bedroom deck, some landscape planters up there. I mean, the hope is that there will be some landscape, you know, some pots and things like that up there.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll open the public hearing to anybody who would like to speak on this.
Good evening, Commissioners. Debbie Sheridan, Valley Vista Drive. I have a couple of questions. With all the glass, I'm wondering if the sun will reflect off of it too much so that it'll be a huge glare. It reminds me of the Pyramid House that you could see from just about anywhere at certain times of the day. So that actually disturbs me a bit. We as a city did not want Maranatha High School because of the lights that were going to be there when they had their games or whatever in the evening. And it seems like this may be something similar that is a bit of concern. And of course, my other huge concern, and I think this may be too late for this because you've already addressed it, but it's so big. And it's going to be sitting up there, and it's going to set a precedent, as we have said with these houses over and over and over. And again, I don't know if it's a moot point at this time, but it's a huge concern, because when they come back with their next house, they'll say, well, look, these are the houses that are contiguous to this, and we look at the house within, what, a 500-foot radius or something, and, well, this one has 4,789 square feet. So those are my major concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
thank you again for all that you do.
Pat Alcorn, and I live on Grandview. I just had one comment, and that's the exposed timber rafters. I assume that the requirements would be fireproofing or something of the wood. Looks like there's probably a lot of wood around this area, and it's right up against the mountains. That's kind of a concern to me.
I noticed that, yeah.
Well, code says
Code
that if
allows
it's
it.
heavy timber, it's a
4x.
particular classification which is acceptable there by state code. I'm sure that they'll have to abide by that all the way through working drawings, or they won't get a permit.
Anyone else? Okay, would the applicant like to respond to any of those comments? Especially maybe the glare off the glass, that's an issue I don't think we addressed
I
before.
think we, it was discussed last time.
No low E.
Right, going with a no low E and just standard glass in order to minimize any reflectability on the building. So I think we can take care of that
Okay.
in that respect. The issue of size, I think the fear that other people coming in will be able to build even bigger houses. I think each lot is restricted as to its square footage. So I think that shouldn't be a concern. We're actually much lower than what we are allowed to do because of the size of the property. But I think each lot would be restricted to its own square footage, depending on size and formula. And I think that's it.
And the timbers are four
The
by,
timber,
four by.
as mentioned, that would be taken care of with heavy timber detailing, and that should be no issue. It'll just
Those
be
are
larger
blue,
members.
blue lamps, right?
No, they're
No?
just 4x. It's a size. It's not the material.
Okay. Thank you.
It all has to do with minimum thicknesses of the wood.
Like 4x6 or 4x8.
Fair enough. Okay, we will close the public hearing and bring it back for commission deliberation. Manish, you want to lead us off?
Yeah, so I had some questions, if you want to come back up, just so we can kind of go back and forth. So, what I was trying not to say, but now I can, is on the south, on basically the master bedroom side, the part of that, you don't see it here, but in plan, that the part that's the flat roof is very narrow. It's like a narrow bowling alley, and then it kind of goes over the office.
For the deck, I mean?
Yeah, like, maybe we can go to the plan, the second
Should
floor
have
plan.
a roof plan.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. Well, actually, go to the second floor plan if
Okay.
it's available
It is.
somewhere.
Here we
There
go.
Okay, so you've got the deck there, and then you've got this L-shaped flat roof, which you're gonna, basically do like a commercial roof in there.
Right,
And-
and if it's a concern, we can easily turn the deck, all that into deck.
Well, what I thought would, and I mean, you feel free to say no, but what I would love to see is that mass kind of come down in height, so that 42-inch parapet you have is basically to kind of create that flat profile, right? The
Right.
volume. So if we lop that off, it actually would drop that down. Or if you just kept it to a low, like a low parapet, and then basically had your low slope roof and all that, and then backfilled it with gravel or have rock or something, so that when you're looking at that, you're not seeing like a gross, asphalt basically roof in there,
What about a
because-
vegetated roof?
and that was my next thing, like, is there any opportunity to potentially just plant that?
I mean, planted roofs are great.
Because you're already creating all the drainage,
You are.
and you can
So-
you can put down the trays that raise it up, so as far as water, it'll,
No, it's a great thing. It is an extra expense, and it's a maintenance issue as well. It's harder to access the roof if there's any issues.
The lawnmower all the way up to the second floor.
I mean,
Oh, yeah, but as far as access, you've got the deck right there. You just step over.
Here's
I mean,
here's
that's-
what you know.
Compared to a regular.
I'm
I think
I'm
that's
with
great.
you the whole way. Like there's trade-offs, right? So
Keep a lawnmower in your bedroom?
you know, I noticed on your material palette it's down there, but the butterfly roof, the top of the roof, or any roofed area you have, you're going with standing seam roof.
We
Metal
are.
roof. Okay. No one's gonna see that. Like no one's gonna see that roof. I mean, I love standing seam roofs. And I try to pitch it to every client I can, and then they find out how much it costs. You know, at $50 a square foot, and you're like, not gonna happen. But you know, I pitch it when you're gonna see the roof because that's the beauty of it. I mean, it's a beautiful roof. But here, no one's gonna see that roof. They're gonna see the underside, and you're gonna do a great job of those exposed timbers. But the top, I mean, I guess mountain lions and bears and everyone else will see it, but we won't. Like, you could go to
Bikers will.
a more cost-effective roof
Mhm.
there and put that money into maybe a planted roof or something that you would see, you know?
Right.
So like, there's ways to do it. It's just a matter of, I think, you know, architecturally, this elevation on the north, that's what struck me is like, if you could drop that line down and then plant the top, it softens that edge tremendously. And it also creates even more differentiation between that center volume, which is the butterfly. You know, that I mean, I like that piece a lot, you know, what's happening in the middle. It's just the things on the end kind of could be refined.
I mean,
you
we
know.
could bring this form down a little. We do have the entry that we do have a sloping roof, that we do need some height here in order to have it terminate cleanly.
And if you didn't want to do the planted roof and it didn't make sense and all that, I would much rather see that section because it's
Go
so
for it.
narrow. Like roof it, like go if you have to, if you still want a flat profile, like that roof you have over the entry, just carry that thing around, and you could do a really shallow hipped roof, because what that allows you to do is you'll still see a very flat profile for the eaves.
Right.
But and metal roofs, if you're gonna do it out of metal, I mean, you can go as little as ½ inch per foot, you know,
And you'd see that standing seam.
and you'd see that.
No,
So-
actually, originally, we did have that as a roofs area. And we struggled with having a roof kind of pitch, you know, gable at this end.
Well, but I mean, I'm talking like very subtle, so that you're maintaining that. And if that gives you heartburn, you could do even carry the same, not butterfly, but it could be a shed coming back this way, or you could play with that same form.
Right.
And create, you know, maybe it's two sets, so that lower set comes out like that over that whole thing from the entry out to the west, you know.
Now, one thing which we played around with, and this connection is what,
I wouldn't worry about, I mean, like, if you put that same guardrail around there, or that can be if you want that to be a parapet wall right there and the rest of it's a roof, that's fine, but like right as it is now, that's really, it's not helping you, it's actually doing you a disservice because it's making that volume higher than it needs, appear taller than it needs to be. So I think you gotta treat something there, you know. I mean, a planted roof would be awesome, but, you know, I don't wanna spend your money, so.
I do.
Um,
I vote for
Um,
that.
on the east side, go back to the elevations, the north and south. Okay, that really bugs me. Like on the east, the double-story volume in beige,
this far.
because it's competing with that centerpiece, you know. And so again, you've got a flat roof on top. So above the window, is that another 42 inches?
Above
The
here,
second story window, like the corner window?
right here,
Yeah, above that window.
above all this.
Yeah, what's the parapet there, the height?
The parapet is at this.
No, up on the second
Oh,
floor.
this one, the
Yeah.
roof. That one is probably about a foot, just in order to capture the slope.
Okay. That reads as a really, I mean, it reads as a two-story volume, right? Because
Right.
it's all flat. So to me, that would be better served if you roofed it and you can carry the same, you know, I would try it like coming back down, or my other thought was extending your butterfly so it covers that element as well. But, you know, because right now I noticed your two butterfly, the ends, they're not the same height. They're a little bit,
Not,
they're a little bit.
Well, the thing is, this form terminates here at this corner, so that has a larger eave.
But if you just extended that and covered that piece, that would actually read a lot better than right now. You've got this volume that's competing with this centerpiece. You got to figure out a way to reduce that mass on the top. Either you roof that piece it's on its own, or you somehow aggregate it under the butterfly that you have going, you know, and simplify that. Because even on the north side, which not many people will see, but they're too close. Like that's kind of to me a problem.
Now, the first thing, we would love to raise this a little higher, or we are hitting our envelope. So
You mean your height?
Our height envelope. So this is right at within our envelope that we need to maintain. And so that's why we try to keep this form as tight as possible in order to make it a secondary form. We looked at roofing it, but roofing it we felt started to take away from this main form. We wanted to make these completely secondary by making them flat, just a cube, and then making these the special.
It just has a lot of volume on that end, you
Could
know.
you push some of that second story mass back onto the garage? Or is that gonna mess up your bedroom program?
It might be a possibility. This starts to show, I mean, there is some break, some differentiation. You know, there's a form here that's a little taller, and then this is the piece that connects to it.
Yeah, it's just you're losing all the effect of that middle butterfly piece. Because look at that beige box on the corner just goes all like within 18 inches, or it seems like it. Those bird's eye things never really help, but like you can see how close they are, and it's just I think you need a little more.
Do we have a diagram of the envelope?
Let me see if we show it on the elevations.
Yeah.
Wait, where is it? Oh,
Top right.
Right.
Top right,
Top
yeah.
right and middle left, yeah.
I mean, what would have been nice there is instead of that deck on the south side for that bedroom, you put it on the southeast there somehow, and
Yeah,
then
that's what
push
I'm
that
saying.
volume.
If you could push some of the volume onto the garage,
and
then you
make
could
it-
have decking there, and then
Exactly.
you could fit the extension of the butterfly that you were talking about.
Yeah, I think, because if that stepped one more time and basically was deck, that mass would basically half itself or push in.
Be partly over the garage, is what you're saying.
Well, you have to rejigger that plan a little
That
bit.
bedroom.
Yeah, that bedroom.
But that's all bedroom. I mean, I don't think moving it around is gonna cause you a bunch of heartache, right?
So part of that would go out.
Go out to here.
Yeah.
Like if that deck that's in the inside corner, that's for that bedroom, was on the outside corner or along that east face somehow,
Yeah.
that would basically create this reduction in mass. You could move like the bathroom onto the thing and move the bedroom part inward, you know?
Is the bathroom aligned with one underneath, so you've got all the plumbing lined up?
On this one, I don't
No.
think it is.
No.
No.
Yeah, so that would be a good idea.
Something, I think you need to
That
play
might
with that
also
corner.
get you, I mean, if you switch the head of the bed to the west wall, you could get the views out, and then that would also allow access onto the garage.
And then the bathroom could go onto,
Yeah. I think the possibilities are.
I don't know.
I'm
I mean, globally speaking, I've got some issue with that side and then that side. I love the middle. I think it's working. I think that works. The way, you know, it's hard when you just see that image up there, but if you had shown it with a flat roof, like if you had shown all the iterations with the flat roof and maybe a gable, you really would recognize like that butterfly form skinnies the makes the house look skinnier in terms of the view up, because the middle is now coming down. And I think, you know, it's hard when you just see it by itself, but I think it's doing you a lot of favors by introducing that form like that, you know. And so I think the middle is really successful. The color palette works. I would just encourage you, and I think the flat roof, the way you have it over the garage, I don't have any heartburn with. It would be great if you could utilize that space too. You know, those roofs, those flat roofs, they work on commercial buildings, but like they're basically are gonna be glorified bathtubs. Like, I mean, water's gonna, you know, accumulate, and it'll get where it needs to go. But I'm just not I try to avoid flat roofs if possible, just because from a drainage standpoint, from a moisture standpoint, from all those things. But I think on the garage, it's working for you. I just think on those two east and west forms, you could tighten that up a little bit or give it a little design thinking and figure out a way to reduce it a little bit and trim it back. And I would love to see either a planted roof or a roof profile there on the west side. So other than that, I think you're there. I think it works on a lot of levels. So.
I was not here for the first iteration of this, but I was very pleasantly surprised with the design. I know that the Stonehouse Designs have. This is my second tour of duty on this commission, and it started in the last, and it has gone from soup to nuts, and you know, New England style, whatever, to I don't know. And so I was very pleased with the design, and I went up and walked the lot a couple times, and I think you've taken advantage of there are two views off this lot. One is off the front into the valley, and the other is down over the debris basin into that little canyon where the historical structures are. And you're not going to get, I mean, much of this house is going to be behind its neighbor to the south. So the things at the back of the property don't give me as much heartburn, because they're going to be essentially invisible to a lot of people. I was very impressed that you did not make the garage a prominent feature in the design. A lot of in previous iterations of the houses, it's like, hey, there's the garage, and oh, by the way, there's the house. So that was very pleasing. The butterfly roof, the butterfly roof and your color palette, I thought were excellent. It blends in with the property, and the house also has an additional advantage, and there's access roads on both sides, and that gives it a little more room. And I'm glad to see it's going to give it a little more fire protection. I was also, finally, thank you for a good basement design. I know that you want to make these projects as robust as possible, and we have been flogging basements since 5 years ago. And this basement design, I think, does what I think you may want it to do. It provides the new owner with interesting spaces, lots of things they can do, and it doesn't make the house any bigger. And so it's for us it's a win, and for you it's a win. That open courtyard, I was tempted to wonder, I want to know why, that the access road on the south does go down, and I believe you are far enough back so that you could, from the courtyard, see into that little canyon. I mean, I I would seriously investigate that, because that courtyard can act as almost another deck in that it has its own view down into the canyon. And I don't think it would see much of anything else, because your neighbor is up and further forward at that point, but you may want to check your sight lines.
We did look at that, because it does have the opportunity to open up. Our concern is that as you open that up, you start changing the existing slope lines, and you start exposing more of the house. At that point, the house will look like a 3-story house.
It will only look like a 3-story house if you're standing on that access road looking back up the road.
Right,
In
and
front of
from
what
the street, you wouldn't,
from the street, it will not look like a 3-story house.
right.
I think the other thing is I don't think it's necessarily an all or nothing thing. I mean, you've got a stack of 3 retaining walls there now, and you know, you could just take the top one off as opposed to dropping
Yeah.
them all down.
Yeah, I would-
and just relieve a little bit.
Yeah, but that view is a cute little view, and you know, I didn't remember it the last time I was up there. Then I got up there and I said, "Oh look, they've moved it back," and because you've moved it back, you've brought that little section of your view more into. You didn't have it when you were closer to the street.
Mm-hmm.
So. I agree that maybe if the parapets were lower, you would have less bulk and massing and not lose any square footage, which might be a clever solution to whatever. I like the idea of plants on the deck, because if you grow the grasses and the stuff that is popular now, you can really disguise the house and it will blend into the landscape, and people won't be able to tell where one ends and the other begins, and that will further reduce the impact of the house. I think that the deck from the bedroom, rearranging that space, I have no problem with that. And once again, you can put more plants on the outside, and you can pick up more space, and you haven't really you've moved stuff around, but the house is not discernibly larger, and it's also larger in the one area where no one can see.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's way back in the back corner. For the rest of us, I think the design guidelines are working well. I think this is finally an example where what we wanted from development in that area is actually coming to fruit, and it's only taken us, I don't know, half a decade. But anyway, for which I'm appreciative, because I've watched this, and so you know, and I think you can learn a lot from this for further projects. That you know, there are ways that you can utilize the space and utilize the lots. You're going to have you know, every one of these lots is going to be a different headache. But you've hit on some ways and some forms and some design characteristics that I think will be quite helpful. I think this design, mid-century modern, lends itself well to the fluctuations of the hills and how that goes, and it's different enough from the cabin and the other houses so that's not going to be a problem, and you can make the forms follow the contour of the hills, and you can also have the opportunity to disguise it cleverly. So I'm okay.
As I said in the last hearing, that I would like to see what it looked like from Harmon's property. I did go up there today. Nobody answered the door, but I did look up there from their front yard. And it's easy to spot, actually, because you can right in the little bit of a
There's a road on either side.
there's a road on either side, and you can actually see some of the curved existing retaining wall from there. I have two things to say about that. One is that it pretty apparently is not going to affect the ridgeline view at all. It looks as though it's going to sit well down
Yeah.
inside there, and and it's nice to confirm that, because I think that a lot of the issues about, what you see, are going to really be non-issues when you realize how that thing is just sitting within the backdrop of the hill. The other thing is that, I wish that some of the computer modeling that we had it shown from a distance too, because when you're down on the Harmon's property, you get to appreciate how far away that house really is. Okay, it's tiny. It's way up there, right? Besides being within the ridge line. I'm really, maybe it is because I teach 2 afternoons a week out at Cal Poly, and I'm kind of critiqued out, when I'm at this point. But I'm really not in favor of being too concerned about the design details on this one. Although I do like what you're saying about that bedroom mass. If there would be a way to relieve that a bit, it may just have to do with the window pattern. More glass on top, and not just repeat it like a cheap office building. And also I like, Bob, what you said about could you open up that downstairs, that courtyard a little bit. None of them are really deal breakers to me. I think, especially given how far away it is from everything else, that in terms of the impacts that we should be concerned with here, that they're really negligible. Just a couple of more comments then. One is one thing we didn't say about the metal roof is that it's very, very resistant to embers, to burning embers. I think probably a metal roof is a pretty good choice, just from a fire safety standpoint, being up where it is. Would you agree with that?
It's a Class A roof, yes.
But any Class A roof would do the same. I mean, an asphalt shingle roof is Class A.
Okay. The last thing I want to mention is that Ms. Sheridan had said something about the size, the overall size of the place, and I want to reiterate what you had said, Bob, a few minutes ago about the basements, because a lot of this is of the size of this house is within the basement, and we had a purpose in doing that, and that was to suppress volume, right? And I think that it's done very, very well here, and so it's, the apparent mass is really an awful lot less than the numbers would suggest.
And in the past, when we've suggested basements, we've heard that, well, the client doesn't want their children separated from them, and we've heard all kinds of things. But so the idea of the functionality of the basement, does it contribute to the value of the house? I think this is a good example where that does. I mean, you've loaded in a lot of extras that people would love to have in a house, but you haven't paid for them with increased volume.
Right.
And that's, to me, that's what I was hoping would happen, because I'm realistic that you need to sell this thing at some point in time, and people are going to want more bells and whistles. But the rest of the city is not being penalized for those bells and whistles, and so that's fine.
The house, if it were built on a flat lot and all of that square footage was above grade, then it would be a much bigger looking house than it is right now. So I think the basement idea is working here. Yep. At all. I'm not really concerned about the size at all. So I'm generally, maybe some of the design issues that have been discussed want to be taken into under advisement here, but I'm not in favor of making any of them a deal breaker or making the applicant come back for any of them.
Okay. Bill?
You didn't leave me much. Thanks. That's all right. No, I'm always impressed that this architect, I know he's got a client to work for, but he always comes back and almost to the letter makes adjustments to his design. My biggest gripe, I guess, last time was the inspirational photos for the cantilevered roofs. I was kind of disappointed with the design. This corrects it. I have to say I'd probably allow more fly than, you know, you guys talk about the butterfly roof. I was trying to think of a cantilevered position, but you know, I would even would have allowed more fly than butter, as it were, because I think the roofs, even if you belied I mean, the inspirational photos that you showed sort of belied the original design. This is much closer to what I think you were trying to get at, and I would have tried to stay within the parameters and try to reduce the bulk and mass, because you're far under your, like you said, your square footage by right, and so that really wasn't the issue. Even though I mentioned square footage, this is more what I was looking for. I would have liked even the roofs to come out and cover the patio more, even if it violated the height. But if, you know, if you're fine with the way it is, I think it fits most of the other parameters. And I agree with Bob, it makes a good use of the design. I've always liked the basement part of it. We finally got like what we wanted out of the basement designs,
Right.
rather than the worst of both worlds, so. Very nice.
Thank you.
You know, I share your thought on the butterfly roof, but we don't have the flexibility to invade the envelope with that the same way we do on the setbacks. So I think that's one thing where when we crafted the hillside zone, we were very cognizant of the building envelope. So it is what it is.
Yeah,
So-
and it's inspirational and creative, so I mean, I would even say there's some language that would allow us that latitude, but I'm not gonna go there just because I don't really wanna do what everybody in the public fears, is that we'll end up with somebody else trying to push that envelope in the wrong way. So in the same way that the architect has respected that, and then that, yeah, we got the best of what we could expect from those designs, but even though I would have allowed more.
Right. I concur with my fellow commissioners. I think that this is a good design, and I think that the pushing of the whole mass to the north really helps sort of blend it into the hillside, and I think we're going to have far less of an issue of it being prominent or visible from people to the south, and we heard some of those people at the last meeting, so I'm thankful for that responsiveness. Also, to Debbie's point about the size, I think that this lot, much better than many of the other lots, can bear that size and that mass. And I think we really need to look at these on a lot-by-lot basis. And so, you know, to the applicant, good job on this, but we're not going to give you a giant house on a lot that it doesn't belong on. But to be fair, if there's a lot that can take that massing, you know, fine, let's put it there. And even here, the massing doesn't look as big as it could because of the use of the balcony, which, I mean, I'm sorry, the basement, which takes into account the slope and is really sort of a little bit open as opposed to a dark, dank basement. So I don't think I have any problem making any of the findings. I could approve the project tonight. I do think there's some design elements that could be improved. But with Joe, I don't think they're deal breakers, but I do think maybe we could, as we have on some of these others, you know, give a little bit of follow-up homework and maybe a subcommittee and staff could work with you on those. It seems like you could consider the idea of dropping one of the retaining walls. You know, I understand your point about sort of hiding the massing, and I appreciate that, but I do think if you just reduce that retaining wall a little bit, I don't think that would really cause heartache there, and it would open up that lower floor, the feel of that even more.
Especially because you're looking up at the house.
Right.
You're looking up at the house. We look at elevation drawings here that are straight on.
Right.
Okay, when you look more like this, then it's going to be even more negligible.
Right. And the other issue is if you took all the retaining walls down and did it the whole way around, you might have to do a lot of grading, and I don't want to, you know, foist that on you. So, you know, consider the idea of maybe just taking one down. I do appreciate though the the raised planter in the sunk garden, because that will help break up that mass. You might want to consider some vines in there instead of just grasses, and maybe even building in like a little bench or something. As far as the decking and the one-story massings, the things that Manish brought up, I agree with Manish, and I think it would be great if we could have a vegetated roof and you could make use of that deck, and maybe rearrange that one bedroom. So those are some of the tweaks that I'd like to see, but I think they're more in the range of tweaks and not things that for me, would make it so I couldn't make the required findings.
Yep. I'm with you on that. I was just, while you were talking, I was thinking, take the opportunity to, like, on that east side, that bedroom, look at potentially if that mass, for the most part, moved onto the garage. Because it would be really cool if like the deck was out in front, like where the bedroom is now, that became like a deck, and because you'd basically have views from that deck, and it could actually be a deck that's accessed from the bedroom, but also that loft space or whatever that is when you get on the second floor, that
The
open
landing,
space,
yeah.
that landing, that could open onto that deck too. So
You
I don't know.
could
There's
even-
something there. I think
Opportunities.
some there, and then it would also make that one level, and then you'd have this. But I mean, I think it would.
You could
Yeah,
also
so-
put an external stairway on that deck if you wanted, and maybe even shrink the taking that second story mass to the north, but also maybe a little bit to the east, and the deck could become like a giant horseshoe around. I mean, it could be a really fantastic space.
I don't know. I think there's some opportunity there. So that, I mean, but
We'll be willing to look at that.
so how do we? What's our with
Well,
those
if we have-
conditions?
If we have consensus on that, then we just need a motion to approve with those further design tweaks, and we can have
Bring it
the
back.
applicant work with staff and have a subcommittee review.
I'm good with that.
All right, I'll move that we approve Hillside Development Permit 1501 and Conditional Use Permit 1501 with the following changes that we suggested.
I'll second.
All in favor?
I
Aye. Okay, motion carries.
I'm opposed. I'm opposed. I'd like to approve it as is.
Okay,
Okay? I'd like to be on record that way.
okay. Motion carried, not carried unanimously. It's 4-1. All right, that's our only public hearing for the night. Thank you. Do we need a break, or are we good to go into the discussion item?
It's up to you guys.
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm okay.
Let's move on to the discussion item, which is discussion regarding amendments to the municipal code for parking.
So at our last meeting, Commissioner Hutt asked if we could go ahead and agendize this item regarding amendments to the municipal code specific to our commercial zone parking standards. And we actually had a discussion regarding this and presentations back on February 2018 and gathered some basic information for your review and consideration. And also the City Council again discussed the matter at their May 28th, 2019 meeting and did direct the Planning Commission to amend the commercial parking standards. A couple of things that they did point out at that time was they really decided to let the market decide in terms of uses within the commercial zone, and that the parking could be eased in terms of the parking requirements for different land uses, but should not be in favor of one particular land use over another. So that's where staff is coming from in terms of looking at this material. I did provide the parking standards, chapter 17.68 in your packet, as well as the city parking lots that are shown in aerial view at various points in the city that are city-owned. I also just recently, not included in the packet, is provided attachment A. This was actually shown and discussed at the presentation that I made to the City Council. So this particular exhibit is showing business establishments in the commercial zone as a bar chart. It's also looking at regulation of businesses. And then it shows distances between blocks within the commercial core of the city. So with that, I think what John's intent was to open it up for general discussion amongst the commission to provide direction to staff.
Right, and I think that what we did before on the commercial code update is we had sort of general discussions, and then we had a subcommittee do some code revisions and report back to the full commission, and I think that was a model that worked well. And I think that we can have some of those discussions about parking. I know that we had already a number of discussions about parking when we were talking about the commercial code. But we decided that it was sort of outside of our charge, and the city council has now told us, no, go ahead and get it done. So that's where we are now. I think that this additional information that Vincent has given us is helpful. I think you can see that on the attachment of the bar chart that the great majority of our businesses are small. And as we know, is part of the update to the non-conforming ordinance, we already waived parking rules for the reuse of existing spaces under 2,500 square feet. So all of those existing businesses don't have a parking requirement. And that's something that beyond code revision, we need to do a better job of educating people. I actually just talked to a restaurateur recently who's got a business in this bar chart, and they said, oh, I can't add more seating because the parking won't allow it. And I said, no, we don't have parking rules for existing spaces under 2,500 square feet. So that's something we can help people know, and that'll help reuse of buildings and hopefully convert nail salons into other uses. Although at some point, if we get rid of all the nail salons, then that won't be good. But
Tax base.
right, yeah. But I think those are some of the issues. The idea of if you look at the parking code itself, it breaks down every single use in the parking, just as it did in the commercial code about whether you have a CUP for this and that. And it gets to this ridiculous level, and really what we might want to do is try to think of combining those up into some sort of groups that are similar, or maybe just have one or two parking standards for the whole downtown. I don't think there's much desire to go all the way to say just get rid of parking standards altogether. I think that maybe that would work for existing buildings, but if what used to be Howie's gets rebuilt, we don't want that to be built with no parking. So I think it makes sense to maintain some parking standards, but I do think we could make them so that they're not an impediment to businesses coming to town, and that would work together with the revision to the commercial code that we're still working on. So that's the sort of the background, and that's the meeting we had with City Council and with the subcommittee of the City Council. And I'm interested to hear what commissioners' thoughts are on this and how we want to move ahead. Also, with regard to the parking code, although we're sort of focusing on commercial, if we're revising the parking code, we can also think about how that affects residential. As you remember, when we looked at R3 and when we looked at the concept of the R3 multifamily uses in commercial code, we changed the parking for one bedroom and studios to one car as opposed to two, whereas in the Canyon Zone and the and R1, that's still two for everything. So we might want to think about whether we want to just standardize that across the city, and maybe that's not going to be an issue in R1 because I don't think people are building a lot of 800 square foot one bedroom bungalows anymore, but in the Canyon it might be. And of course for second units, those are one, and that's sort of out of our hands because that's state law.
Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of issues with that. I think right now we say also you know, if you have, it's bedroom based, right? Parking for residential, so.
Right now, yeah.
But, you know, if we want to encourage more adaptive reuse of, you know, adding more second units or ADUs, you know, and garages are candidates for conversions, but suddenly you can't do that because you don't meet you don't have the two covered spaces, or, you know, or 3. So there's some conflicting things, like, if you want to encourage that, we have to sort of look at the parking too, in conjunction of how far would we relax that, you know. I know there's always this issue of people don't want to see residents' cars parked on the street, but, like, personally, I mean, we don't have a problem with that, but I'm sure there are issues with that in the canyon and other places, but like, that isn't a big impediment. Like, that to me would be fine. I mean, as it is now, those who are lucky enough to have garages in some of the older parts of town, they're not parking cars in there.
Yeah.
So the cars are out anyway.
Well,
in public.
I'm sure none of us are guilty of that.
There's more.
I don't have a
more toy-
garage, so.
More toy storage and wood shops than,
Um,
than car parking.
But anyway, I know that's not where we're focused here, but I think there's a lot of conflicting things. It just, what's driving us, you know, and I think if it could be clearer and more pointed in that, rather than pointing in, you've got to have this, but if you want to do this, you can't do that because you've got too many bedrooms or whatever, I don't know, you know, so.
Right.
But with the commercial, I'm trying to understand, is this a case of we just want to simplify like this list, or relax the parking further down this bar chart, or what's, like,
Well,
ultimately-
those are all options on the table. I mean, I think the idea is that the direction from City Council is, just as we looked at the commercial code and found that we are requiring CUPs for a lot of businesses that other cities aren't, and that's hindering businesses coming to town. Our parking code is archaic
Yeah.
and punitive at times, and hindering businesses coming to town, and the reuse of spaces especially from non-restaurants to restaurants. And restaurants, the way we calculate currently restaurants is based on seating. And so you know, you can have just a few tables and quickly run out of your parking requirement. And so it makes it difficult to accommodate new restaurants coming into town and taking over spaces that weren't restaurants. But perversely, we don't require any parking for sidewalk dining. So, you know, you have to have all this parking for the tables
Inside.
that you have inside, but when you put a table outside, it magically doesn't require any parking. I guess because people walk to the sidewalk, but you know, I don't know. And so it just goes to show how our code is dysfunctional, and it makes it very difficult for businesses to come down, especially restaurants, which are something we have a chance of capturing. I mean, it's not like we're gonna get, I don't know, department store, right? Or a lot of the uses that are gonna go to the mall or Pasadena. But we could get some more restaurants. And we could also perhaps get some more office uses. One of the things in the general plan talks about incentivizing office in the same spaces that could also be residential, so above or behind, but not in the prime storefront area. And so as you remember, in the commercial code update, we made the differentiation between the prime storefront area and the rest of the building that's available in the commercial code, or commercial zone, and within the industrial zone. So that might also be something we want to think about if we want to do a parking standard just based on the building and the location of the portions of the building. So we have like maybe one standard for the prime storefront area and then one standard for the rest of it. And then if you want to change uses, doesn't matter because it's all the same standard.
But is our situation like unique in the sense of very few of the commercial buildings like I think of other areas where you have a commercial building, you know, there may be a medical use or retail use, and you drive up onto the property of that commercial building and you park, you know, whether it's in the back or front or whatever.
Unless you're in Santa Monica, and then you know, you park 2 blocks away and walk to whatever it is.
Well, yeah, but like here, it seems like all our commercial is pushed up on the street,
Right.
right, on the boulevard. But then we've got pockets of large parking either behind it or adjacent or whatever the case is, the public lots.
Well, that, and in large measure, that's because of the history of our development. I mean, we're a streetcar suburb,
Yeah.
right? Our downtown was laid out based on the red car, and the shops were meant to take, and in the traditional pattern of storefronts that were right on the street.
Yeah.
And so people would come to Sierra Madre in the red car and walk to the shops, and it worked fine. And then when the red car left, we accommodated that by having the big parking lot, you know, in the back in Mariposa, and then a few others dotted around. That's different than the sort of car-based suburban model, which is reflected in our zoning code. And so the sad thing, I think, is, you know, if our downtown magically disappeared and were rebuilt on our current code, it would look nothing like it, and nobody would be happy, because that's one of the quaint, charming things about our town, is that it looks like a city, a little city, instead of, you know, not to pick on Hastings Ranch, but Hastings Ranch, right?
Well, it's very important that we recognize that, and that we make sure that in the big picture our zoning reinforces that, because the upshot of it changing the way you suggested, you know, is that it becomes a much less walkable city, right? If you suddenly go to a suburban model from a streetcar model, then you have freestanding buildings with asphalt in between them, right? You don't have a continuous row or block fronts of storefront, which are really easy to walk. They're very conducive for walking. If you you know, think about Huntington Drive, or right out in Monrovia, you know, absolutely not walkable at all, unless you like weaving across parking lots. So this, in the big picture, what you're talking about is very important for us to maintain.
Right, and the same concepts that are done in like Old Town Pasadena, the idea of park once and then go around, you know, we employ, but on a much smaller scale. So instead of a giant parking garage and then walking around Old Town, we have, you know, surface parking but behind the street.
But that was my question, is like those storefronts or those commercial properties along the Sierra Madre Boulevard, like that are in front of or above like the Mariposa lot, are they, when the business comes in, are they annexing some of that parking in their count to satisfy, like, are they able to utilize that, or are they literally have parking spots on their property in the back?
Well, before we updated our non-conforming ordinance, right, which gave credits, the basic answer was no, they didn't get credit for that. So if they had parking, they got to use that parking. If they didn't, they had to come up with parking. Now,
Well, they paid.
yeah, and
So they count some spots
what
there?
we did say, though, is that if you had a use that was non-conforming because of parking, you could switch to another use that was similarly non-conforming. So if you had a nail salon, and that required 4 parking spaces, but you had none, and you wanted to switch to a store, a little retail shop that had required 4, you could do that. So we sort of gave you credits for what you should have had for the use, right? But if you wanted to switch from the nail salon to a restaurant that would require 12, we'd say no. And now, with our current non-conforming ordinance, if you're under 2,500 square feet, we say you
There's
can
no
switch to
requirement.
whatever you want.
Yeah, there's no requirement. You're able to, there's no requirement, so.
Effectively, yeah. But that's only for existing. So if you came in and you wanted to build a new 2,000 square foot you'd have to supply all the required parking. And as Bob said, we used to have a concept where you could buy some of your required parking by paying the city in lieu fee, and a lot of different cities do that, and I think Pasadena has a very complicated housing credit thing. We had just a simplistic one, but the fee was $2,500, and people realized, well, that's way too cheap, and so we just deleted it. Instead of just like moving the fee up, you know? But the thing is that we could, as a city, if we had people pay those fees, there are other things we could do to achieve parking by, like, say, taking the diagonal parking that we use in a lot of downtown and taking it further up north on Baldwin. We could probably achieve more parking spaces there, and I don't think, well, maybe some people want a giant parking garage, but I don't think that's in the cards. I don't think we have the money for it, and I would not want to see that. But that doesn't mean we couldn't have, you know, some businesses come in, pay some in lieu fees, and then use that money to restripe and obtain a few more parking spaces on Baldwin or whatnot.
Well, but the question preceding that is, if we relaxed, like, theoretically, a bunch of parking for more square footages, would we get to a point where we don't have enough parking currently, like in the public lots? Like, would we be parked out?
It could be, but
Like,
you know,
do we need more spots?
one of the things that you're onto, that the city can, I think, create some more parking. I think on Baldwin from Sierra Madre Boulevard up to Laurel, it can go to the diagonals. Even on Auburn, which is a very wide street, you could do from Highland down to Sierra Madre Boulevard, but not by the school, but from Highland down, you could do diagonal at least on one side of the street and still have enough. So there's ways. I mean, you have some large streets in this town that would support some diagonal parking. My wife and I, when we go to restaurants in this town, we walk, and we're on Grandview, and it's not that far. And I think I think we can, by creating some parking and by not being quite as demanding on the business owners, we can, you know, we can encourage more development, and people would be willing to walk or park near and do it. I think one of the things for this, if we have a committee, one of the things we need to do is sit down with the PD and find about, tell me about overnight parking. Why, you know, when I got here, that was like, you know, the 11th commandment. And they used to, I mean, there was a police officer whose entire career at night was writing parking tickets.
Person exists.
And if you don't call them, boy, you got a ticket. Now it's like, you know. So, you know, tell me about that. The other thing is, I think we're going to need another parking zone, and that coincides with the red flag zone. I think that we need to look really carefully at what we're trying to educate the public, and we're looking at a zone in this town that has critical significance on red flag warnings. And a lot of it has to do with parking, because we cannot get fire engines or large rigs into some places, especially in the canyon, up in the canyon now, even with that. I mean, personally, I'd like to see more red curbs, but there, the people are actually going to have to use their garage as a garage.
Right.
But I think that's in terms of public safety, and I think that's in terms of the city's. Now, for them, maybe there needs to be some kind of overnight parking concern. I think below Grandview, tell me why we need to be obsessed with this. Now, if you have an oversized rig, you have your giant RV and it's 2 trailers and stuff like that, you know, maybe. But you know, I think we should also, you know, let public safety drive part of this conversation. But in terms of commercial development, I think there's a lot of opportunity in, you know, the near the center of town to restripe and to remark and to come up. The minutes for this meeting show, in the last meeting, I brought up the fact that it was a parent conference night, and Baldwin was parked from the boulevard all the way, you know, way up, and it was all being used. And you know, this is something that happens on a irregular basis, but it's not infrequent. So I think that we should look at that, the overnight parking, the increased number of angle parking. And also, I don't mind having parking, driven by square footage. You know, you've got so much square footage, okay, that's gonna require, so if they do take Taylor's Market, make it into, you know, I don't know, whatever you wanna do, Trader Joe's or whatever, what does that mean? And you could, if you build it too big, there won't be enough parking, so you need to build it at the right size, because we don't have, we can do a lot of things in this town, but we can't create space. So,
To me, that one, I would look at, I don't know if we can or can't. I mean, to me, that seems like the last corner or area that has the potential to be.
there's a big lot south of the, post office.
Yeah, but I mean, as far as like a commercial development of some sort, like, you know, I don't know, grocery store or whatever,
Right.
or a multi, like, complex, you know, like, that's a big piece, that chunk, the front part and the back. So to me, I would almost, whatever we did, I wouldn't want it to adversely affect that. Like, I almost think like you'd have to look at that as its own case, you know? Because you wouldn't want to dump all that parking, but you also wouldn't want to drive a potential, you know, whatever the development is, and if it made sense, you know, that they wouldn't be able to come in because they needed to provide 42 spots, you know, and to me that would be a lose, you know. So, and if whatever we did affected that, that would be a problem.
Look,
know,
you're
like we don't want to relax parking and say, you know, at 20,000, 10,000 square feet or something, because then you're going to have an issue there, I think. So it's kind of a balance.
You know that in architectural planning, you know, in preliminary, the preliminary phase of work, that you're always balancing how much building versus how much parking. There's always a point in there in which the numbers balance out. One is never an excuse for the other.
Yeah.
And it's just based on how much building mass you can have and how much parking you're going to provide. This is not a big deal. Everybody's been doing that forever, as long as there's been parking. And
And
I
I
mean,
think.
so what? That tells you how much you're going to build.
We saw when we were updating the commercial code and we started looking at samples about how the second story articulation will go.
Yeah.
And you remember we started making models based on a couple of sample lots that pretty soon all of the samples that we did, we realized we couldn't build because there wasn't the parking for 'em.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think part of the idea is if you want to replicate what we have in downtown now, we can't do it with the code we have now.
Yeah.
And the parking is one of the main impediments. So I think, you know, we need to think about, I think most people think that if we just reuse the existing buildings, right? They're sort of parked already. So then the question is, well, if you build a new building, what about, like, say, the tea house? You know, that the one was a salon. They designed the thing so you could have outdoor parking in the front. I'm sorry, outdoor seating, right? But they didn't have enough parking for it. And because of our code, you can seat in the sidewalk and it doesn't count, but if you did in the front yard, well, then they have to count it. And that was a perfect example of, you know, destroying the economics of a use. And so, you know, we told them, oh, we're updating our code. So I don't know where they are in status of things, but hopefully, you know, we'll get some of this done so that they can actually have seating
And
in
they had
the
parking
front.
behind the building. They had some parking.
And they have actually a fair amount of parking, right? And I think another issue with parking that we see is the, you know, the issue of the short-term parking right in front of the building. And, you know, I want parking right in front of Beantown when I get my coffee in the morning, in front of the pizza place when I go in to get pizza, and in front of the bank when I hit the ATM. And so maybe, you know, more 20-minute spots or something makes sense there because, you know, having employees park right in front instead of on Mariposa is a big
Yeah.
problem. And I don't think anybody wants to go to the point of parking meters or something like that, but we could have more 20-minute spaces, and I think that would help resolve that. And there was also talk of maybe having some sort of taxi stand kind of things where, Uber could stop. And that would be helpful.
There are two things that I don't know about that I would like to see us explore. We tried on one, some kind of shared parking. I mean, we looked at the doctor's place having all those places. Can that be shared, and can we incentivize that?
Mm-hmm.
And now tonight we had an applicant that put a lot of stuff underground. Can we incentivize some kind of subterranean parking?
Well, the issue with subterranean parking is it's really expensive, and it only makes sense if you're doing
Building a lot.
a bigger, so the only places I see that would even be start to be feasible was if you redid Howie's,
Mhm.
or if we redid the Mariposa lot, or maybe the city lot on the corner of
Auburn?
Montecito and Baldwin.
Yeah.
If we built, we could subterranean that and then build something on top, but I
That's
can't
good.
imagine that anyone would want to build that much on the Auburn lot, because
Well,
it's sort of
I
behind
think
everything.
that Howie's one would be, because of the way the terrain is, it's actually high at the street.
Right.
And it actually goes like that, so it'd almost be like a tuck under.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't have to be fully submarine. That one would probably work out, because you'd get such a large podium to
Right.
build on, and you could take that one would
But
be
if you look at, and maybe if you think about the tea house, if they hadn't reused that building and they just demoed it, you could potentially have a situation where you don't have fully subterranean, but where you drive down and then maybe you build sort
Well,
of.
what
a
about
little
the
bit of deck.
property next to it, south of it?
Yeah, that has
Isn't it kind of raised and
yeah.
there's parking?
Right, but the unfortunate thing of that, using that as an example, is that is not my favorite building. That's how I'll say that. So I don't hold that one up as an example of things we want to encourage, but there are plenty of better looking examples. But yeah, I don't think if you have, if you look at, say, there's that little lot in between Arnold's and the Kensington, or there's a couple of those lots across the street that maybe could get redeveloped. None of those are big enough to do subterranean. That's just
Yeah.
not going to happen.
No, the only thing you could really do there would be a well-reinforced soft story,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, okay.
You really, I wanted to mention that there's a difference I think we want to recognize between doing any kind of enclosed or subterranean parking for staff or patrons of a given building, as opposed to a parking garage that's public. When the idea of a public parking structure had been discussed in previous years, there were a lot of concerns raised, or some concerns raised, I should say, about the public safety issue. In other words, it really raises the need for surveillance from that of just an open parking field. There was concern on the part of some residents about that.
Right.
But if you the problem with soft stories are probably just that they're so deficient in their structuring. There's nothing to say that you can't, if you want to, if you want to have more building because you want to develop more parking, that you can't spend the money for a soft story, which is not really soft because it's properly reinforced.
Well, a lot of
by
this town is
today's
on a
code.
hill, and that
And you can make
leads
use
up,
of that.
leads to certain opportunities.
Right.
And
Exactly.
I don't think we should squander them. And I'm just thinking about, are there ways to incentivize that kind of use, where someone would be willing to put in the time, effort, and money to do that? You know, quite honestly, if we went back to the cost of, if they wanted to buy some extra parking places, then we could create a fund that we could then, modify some of our city lots to be larger.
Right.
But, I don't know how many parking spaces we'd have to sell before we got to that point, but.
But I don't think that I just don't see that there's the money there to build a parking garage. Like I said, I think that some of the parking potentials that you mentioned, like going up Baldwin or maybe Auburn, doing diagonal parking, we could achieve parking spaces there that are sort of cost efficient and reasonable. And also, I like the diagonal parking because as a driver, it's easier to get into, and as a pedestrian, it provides more of a buffer from the cars.
Although they're really hard to get out of, like on Sierra Madre Boulevard. Like
You
where
hope
the
that no one's
subway
coming.
is and like
Yeah.
parking there.
You need to have a rear. That's one of the benefits
You
of the
just
rear
back
camera,
out.
because
No,
with the
even
rear
with the
camera,
rear
you
camera,
can see the.
no,
No,
there was
'cause
like
the camera's not seeing the guy that's coming
Yeah.
from
this
the.
constant flow, and you're like, and speaking of parking, another real bad one, which was the subway development, when you go out the back onto Mariposa, oh my gosh, that
Yeah.
blind corner, because that retaining wall.
Yeah, because
You
of that
just
big
cross
wall.
your fingers and
Well,
just.
yeah. People drive slow in town. I mean, that's
Oh man.
a lot of the stuff that we need to.
But anyway,
But
I mean, to me, globally, I think whatever gets us where we don't inhibit development or redevelopment in terms of new businesses coming in, I think that should be the driver and not the parking. So like, relaxing parking to a point that makes sense is a smart move. Do I think cars are going away? No, but at the same time, I think part of the DNA of this commercial zone is its walkability. Short of the masses of people coming from other places up to this downtown to use, I mean, in cars, I think pretty much in town, most people, I would say, if they're gonna patronize these places, unless they're catching it on the way to work or on the way back, are walking or taking a quick, like, 20-minute spot, and boom. So it's not like,
They're there all day.
yeah, they're there all day, so I don't, so to me, I don't see a parking issue, but I see it as an impediment to businesses coming in that potentially could, because they have to provide these fictitious, they're not fictitious, but these spots for their business. So
Right.
to me, that's the global picture, is relaxing parking, because I think in my opinion, there's plenty of parking. It may not be where you want it, but like, I mean, we're talking like the Auburn lot, like you're right there, on the boulevard. You may have to walk a little bit to get to the pizza place or to Beantown or whatever, but Mariposa, I mean, so I think there's parking.
Well, and I think that the whole where you want it thing is also a bit of an issue of education. If we could try to get employees to park in the Mariposa
Yeah.
lot instead of parking right in front, it just makes everything a lot easier. But I guess, so we can sort of slice and dice this. So there's, one issue is the sort of concept of simplification, going away from a parking standard for every different use, like so many spaces per bowling alley lane, things like that.
Well, where does that, I'm just trying to, like, where does that concept originate from? It's because we think certain uses are high intensity or high turnover, and therefore, at any given time, on that bar graph of like, where there's no reservations available between this time and this time because they're packed, there's gonna be tons of people in cars coming and parking, and so you need to provide that.
Right.
And-
That's the idea, and it's the pure suburban model or the cornfield model, where that one use is out in the middle of nowhere. So everyone who gets there has to come to a car, and they're not going to go anywhere else. So instead of parking the Mariposa lot and then stopping by the bank and the post office and then having dinner, you drive to the post office, then you get in your car and you drive to the bank, and then you drive to the restaurant.
Yeah.
And so that those numbers are high, because I think we have that sort of park once, concept. But also the idea was just, I think that, that was sort of the style, just like in our commercial code where we had that laundry list of uses and we have to figure out, well, for a bowling alley, how do we do this? And for a this thing, and, we never figured out a Pilates studio, so you can't have one, and we don't know how many people would park there, right? So to me, it's more an issue of just trying to clean that up and make it as simple to implement as possible. And that's one issue. The other issue is whether we want to take the numbers that are scattered across all these things and just average them out and say, okay, well, this is the average number, or do we want to go further and say, well, this is the average number, but we want to have some sort of reduction because we don't want to over-require.
But I mean, I think that whole requirement thing, like based on square footage, or is not antiquated, but it's the wrong model for our situation.
Do you
To
do
me,
it by use? In other words, how many people?
Yeah,
are gonna-
so like
How
I-
many people are you gonna have in here at the max, and then that determines the?
well, so so maybe it's something more like on intensity of use versus like if it's a law office, that's
Zero.
2,600 square feet, and we require some parking based on square footage, like that person more than likely, or persons are parking like all day or like 8 to 5. You have to assume that, right? It's not a transient use where you're coming and going, right? So like it's low intensity, but it's more not permanent, but like longer duration.
Right.
So those kind of categorizations are more helpful than like law office is 500 square feet per parking spot, and a chiropractor is 250, and a nail salon's 100 or whatever. Like I think that because there's finite amount of space, and we could also argue there's a finite like realm spectrum of businesses that tend to be attracted to
Right.
our downtown. Like we're not going to get a car dealership. We're not going to get a large there's not going to be a Walmart here in town. Like whatever. Like there's like a spectrum. So why are we also then in the code going 3 pages of, like you said, bowling alley to like
Feed store.
feature?
So-
Like it doesn't make sense. Like we're overcomplicating it.
So then we're going back to the example that John gave us. Okay,
Skating
well,
rinks.
I have this restaurant, but it only has one table.
Well, I mean that to me is like easy fruit. Like that just seems like an anomaly. Like we need to clean those things up where we don't count any parking for outside seating, but inside it's per seat, or whatever. That's
Well,
dumb.
I've only got one table. It's right here it's right here.
Hey, look,
And it seats what, 6 people, so that's,
I think we've said it, and that is that a lot of these lists are silly, they're antiquated, and things change.
Right.
There are now businesses in town, many of them in smaller storefronts that we couldn't have imagined 10 or 20 years ago. And certainly when the last time that these lists were made, they never could have been imagined. I mean, we could simplify this down to, like, do you know off the top of your head, I don't, how many different, if we go to the building code and we look at, the square footage requirements, right? How many different categories are there really?
Well, I know
They're
staring
only-
at that thing, it fits on half of one sheet. Like it's like a table in like chapter 10 that says, classroom, retail, whatever. It's this really
Yeah, and
short list.
if we just took out of that list what would pertain to downtown, right? If there's a classroom downtown, it's probably under a business category anyway. It's
Yeah,
probably an
Reese approved
extremely
The dance,
short
yeah.
list where the building code would see fit to assign different number of square feet per person, right? And maybe we don't have to be, I'm not saying we use the same list, but I don't see why we have to be any more complicated than that. Certainly, the state is not revising the building code constantly to get rid of old businesses that don't exist anymore, and to add new businesses, like tea houses, and get rid of the skating rinks. Their list is much more general than that, and it works.
Well, I mean, I think the 20-minute thing is huge because that kind of helps the transient or the turnover traffic. Restaurants is a huge thing, and I think if anything, our downtown is, if you classify it as one business dominant, it's going to be sort of the hospitality restaurant, like, whether it's a coffee shop or sushi restaurant or whatever, I mean, there's a high turnover too, but.
And they are differentiated in the building code.
Yeah, so like, why don't we just look at that? Like, that's a dominant use.
Right.
Like, so how do we park that? And we also know the buildings are finite, like, short of new development, what's there, we know the sizes, like, they're not 10,000 square foot buildings,
Right.
like, they're small storefronts, like, so what are the parking requirements? And if
And
that's.
I think the other thing is, as Bob was saying about the shared parking, is that, if you have, a new mixed-use development that has different kinds of uses, you could explore shared parking possibilities. But the other concept of shared parking is just the whole downtown is shared parking. Because we have, if you have a large parking field on Mariposa, and you've got the office that is pretty much full all day, but then you have a restaurant that's, most of its crowd is for dinner, they can use the same parking space.
Yeah.
And instead of having one for one and one for another, you can reduce the uses there. And so I think, part of the blessing that we have is that we do have this sort of inherent shared parking system. And so we don't have to go to the same level of parking requirement for,
A few years ago, there was a statistic out there that said that there were, in the state of California, 7 public parking spaces for every one vehicle. You imagine how many?
it's higher now.
Right?
It's over 8.
It's pretty ridiculous when you think about it. Right? That everybody, there's just so much replication, so much redundancy based on the way the codes are.
Because they think every parking place is numbered and it's assigned to one
Right.
spot in one business, and it's really not true.
Oh, and if I go to the post office and then I want to go to lunch, right? And then I want to go someplace else downtown, stop and see the lawyer, for instance. Oh, I've got to have 3 parking spaces by that. Okay, it's just
Now,
ridiculous.
here's a question, this a dumb question, which it may already have been looked at. Are the existing lots been surveyed to see if they've been optimally striped? Like, is there any more parking in some of those lots? Like, how they've been looked at?
I don't
'Cause
know.
not that how you do it has changed a whole lot, but, one of the tricks that a lot of cities utilize was percentage of parking and these never work with the bigger cars now, but it's compact versus
Yeah, I
standard.
don't wanna do the compact.
But like, just to look at it, well, what raised my eyebrows on it was, I don't know when those were striped or when they were laid out or what, but has it been looked at, to see if there are more spots there?
Well,
'Cause that would be.
it's the SUVs and the large pickup trucks that have upended that whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, but it's also like if you have a ton of like tree islands, in your
Right.
thing, like,
Well,
They put in traffic calming bump outs on the boulevard. And I was on the fire department when they did it, and we all went crazy, because but that did take up some of the parking.
But even in the Mariposa lot, there are a bunch of islands,
Right.
and I like the
I
trees,
think we would
but
rather-
I wonder.
Right.
But I think
Yeah.
one on my list is, can the city create additional spaces? And I think, on some of the streets, and I think by re-examining what we already have, there may be ways for the city to create more spaces, which would provide us with some relief. And then we could simplify the parking requirements so that between the two, it would be a wash.
Because I think your idea is strong in the sense of we should look at that whole area as like shared parking.
Right, right, right.
Because all the infrastructure, built infrastructure is there. Like,
Right.
it's not like we're dealing with blank dirt and we're gonna be building something, you know? Like, it's already there, so we almost know how much parking we need. I mean, uses can vary, but we kinda know if like, we can take up all of that pressure with the lots we have, and then it all becomes shared, and then you simplify kinda like what you need, cause you're just gonna pull from these lots, and that,
And I think the other part about it is that, you know, before we even get to the point of creating additional parking, we could just optimize the use of the parking that we have. I mean, one of the things we could do is just educate people better about where they are. You know, if you go to, like, Monrovia, they have signs that have little maps of where all the businesses are and where all the parking are and the ways you can walk. And, you know, that kind of thing would just, to encourage people to go to those parking lots that don't get filled up as much as, you know, the 3 spaces in front of Beantown.
yeah, I mean, like, you really, and we talked about this way back when, was just wayfinding and signage. Like the Auburn lot's a perfect example. It's behind kind of like the former jailhouse, and it's kind of tucked in there, and then you've got the little street that is the back of the businesses. But like, you don't really know that that's there unless you drive up Auburn, you're like, oh, there's a lot here. And that little alley, basically, like, if there was better signage, because you could walk right down that and boom, you're right
Right.
on the boulevard, you know?
And there's part of it that's to the east that's private, and so it's sort of confusing
Yeah.
because you don't know which one you can park in and which one you can't. Yeah.
But that's at least as accessible as some of those large parking fields in Monrovia behind the buildings.
Yeah.
Now, what's the difference, other than the fact that, you know, ours
You don't
is-
know it's
is
there,
really
that's
pretty
all.
derelict.
And all of it's more accessible than the giant parking around the mall. I mean, if you go to the
Oh.
mall, you got to park miles away.
Yeah, there's never enough parking there. But that's another,
Don't go.
we can't solve that.
Don't go. Yeah. Spend your tax dollars here.
But even access, like, and I don't know how that gets codified, but like out of the Mariposa lot directly to the boulevard, like between like Bank of the West, and you can come up there, but like, you're not thinking that because those are driveways going, basically, one's like the night drop or whatever for them, and then the other one going down next to the clothing shop. Like, it's not like it's more car centric, right?
Right.
So like, if there was a way, like, you know, almost something as silly as like a pedestrian sidewalk that kind of, you knew you could
If
park back there and come
I went
straight.
up next to the dress place, and they took that island out
Yeah.
that they used to divide for the bank
Something like
lot.
that.
They would still have 2 ways in and out, and room for a
So
pedestrian.
those kind of things where you know, it's the ease of use.
Right.
Monrovia does have well-developed pedestrian alleys
Yeah.
from their parking fields out to Myrtle Avenue.
Yeah.
And we don't.
We could do the same. I mean, we also have the
The arcade or whatever.
through 38 West. I mean, you could go through there.
Yeah,
And they might appreciate more foot traffic.
And one of the things in the general plan talks about improving the business facades that front onto that parking lot,
On the back.
on the back,
Yeah.
yeah. Because, I mean, the other thing you do is just do what I do, is walk through the bottle shop, because
Yeah.
it's right there.
Say hi to us.
Yeah.
Of course, I'll just have to
Give me the
pass through
business
and mess with
walkthrough.
those guys.
And, you know, and
We can't get a solar-powered people mover tunnel or something, you know, that people could just jump, it'd be an incentive, hey, like a free ride, you know, you end up right on the sidewalk.
we are getting solar panels on the city lot, right?
Yeah, let's have them do something.
Yeah, we should, as part of that, we should put electric chargers, car chargers.
And that's actually going to be a requirement, or it is a requirement in the building code, parking code. For if you're providing new lots or renovating existing lots, you're going to be required to provide charging stations. Similarly, and I provided this on the
Right.
dais,
Mm.
also shade trees is also another requirement.
The shade trees and the solar panels don't live well together.
Yeah.
Or electric charging stations.
How many electric charging stations, what's the ratio, is there? Because I looked at Pasadena code and I thought it was like 100 or 200, and I don't think anybody's gonna do that.
It's gotta be a percentage of the spots you have.
Yeah, but it's
Or-
really low.
So I'm looking at one table here, 10 to 25 parking spaces would require one charging station.
Yeah, it's a table, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the only one who's gonna do that is the city, and if, the corner's ever redeveloped.
Yeah.
Right. So, step one, simplify.
Simplify?
Step two, reduce. Do we wanna reduce?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should err on the side of promoting business and that whole cycle instead of parking. I think parking can take care of itself. I'm under the belief that there's plenty of parking. It just may not be where you want it, but we have it.
Step three, putting back in an in lieu fee that's a more reasonable number.
Yeah.
Creation of additional spaces through restriping on Auburn and Baldwin, at least, if not other places.
Yeah, one of the things that I think this is somewhat outside our charge, but it's something we should coordinate with the city council or whomever does this, is I know that they were consolidating the assessment districts for downtown. And so hopefully that streamlines some of the financing and maybe makes that a place
Did it get
where.
voted down?
And that got voted down, yes.
Oh, okay, well, forget that idea.
City parking fields were last redeveloped when, does anybody even remember when Jim McRae was the city
Of course I
manager?
remember Jim
It's
McRae.
it's a very long time ago, all right, and that's I seem to recall distinctly that the last city parking field improvements were done while he was the city manager, or the city whatever he was.
Well, the creation of additional spaces and maybe the increased number of 20-minute zone, I like the
yes.
idea. But I also want to make sure that we push the concept of a red flag zone. And then examine, overnight parking. Why are we, are we, it used to be because the street sweeper would come out in the middle of the night. And also so we could tell who was
There was
robbing
a
houses.
vagrancy issue
Yeah.
there.
But, I'd like to have somebody tell me why it's important again, or it's still important, because it's not enforced.
Not enforced, yeah.
What about, Vincent, I looked at the parking code and there was, past all the requirements, there was these issues on how the parking lots are laid out.
Right.
And it seemed totally like for a shopping center parking lot. And there's these goofy diagrams that I'm wondering if we've ever even used.
I haven't used them.
Oh, these standard charts?
Right.
Yeah.
But there's nowhere that says the minimum parking lot stall is this big and the minimum garage is this big. And I was like, oh, that would actually be useful. And there's well, if you do it at such a,
I'm sure many of these diagrams originally were pulled from the International Building Code.
yeah. And if stuff is in building code, we don't have to dupe it in our zoning code. It's much better to leave it there and let them update it as necessary, because we don't do a good job of updating.
Well, also, vehicles are changing so much, right? The last few years, it was before SUVs got to be a big deal. I recall that our Volvo sedan, which was considered to be a full-size car, at that point fit very neatly into a compact
Right.
parking space, okay? And so at that point, it was almost like they could all have the dimensions of the compact spaces, but then once we got SUVs and then pickup trucks got to be more prevalent and much larger, you know, that all went out the window. And so I don't know currently how those dimensions in there even stack up against what our real parking situation is.
Well, I think these dimensions were put in long before the whole compact even came, so they're probably fine. They're from like the 50s, I think.
You know, and we don't want to like, we already create more pressure with handicap parking requirements, electric charging requirements. We'll have, if we have to have handicapped accessible electric charging spaces, then we'll really have a mess on our hands. We're going to really make a mess out of things if we try to have compact parking spaces and then SUV or pickup parking spaces too.
What happens then is you
ridiculous.
stripe 2 spaces, but you really only have 1. You know, and so you've made these hypothetical parking spaces. And,
Yeah,
and
well,
you're
guys
gonna-
with dualies do that
Right.
right now anyway.
So I guess the other thing, we want to take some of these standards that are sort of focused on, you know, 50s shopping center and sort of streamline them and make them a little bit more current.
Can we make sure also that last time we talked about this, we had talked about planning things so that the net effect was that nobody pushed the commercial boundaries of downtown out from where they are right now. And I'd like us to keep that in mind and make sure that.
Well, I mean, we're not changing the zoning map on this. Let's see, I think I had another question. One thing was when we talked about the commercial code update, and for our housing element, we're required to put single resident occupancy, which are basically studio apartments. And we said that we were required 1 parking space, but if they were affordable, we wouldn't require a parking space. So as we think about the parking and how it goes to residential, do we want to have that be our only bonus for affordability, or do we want to have a more general thing, like if you do an affordable unit, it's 1 less than required across the board?
I want to see some examples.
I mean, nobody's going to make a 5-bedroom McMansion affordable, but you could have 2-bedroom units that, if you want to make them affordable, and then you've got a 2-bedroom or 2-car garage that you need to, increases the cost a lot.
I mean, I'm again for, if it's an affordable unit, that the parking, like the bonus is that there isn't a parking requirement.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't have to park it, for a multitude of reasons. I don't think 1 less, because then even if in that scenario you had to have 2, in the affordable version you'd have 1. You still require 1, right?
Right.
I mean,
Does this get back to getting all the cars off the street at night? Is that what's driving this agenda? I mean, because you could build a house and the guy parks at the curb.
Yeah.
I mean, so, we at one point, we seem to be driven by all our parking is not on the street except in the commercial area, and we're talking about needing more parking, but, I mean, if people can park at the curb and walk around the commercial area, why can't they park at the curb and walk into their house and leave their car at the curb? Why is it that it's required that they get it off the street?
Yeah.
So I'd like to go back and, I'd like just somebody to tell me why we have overnight parking in because that seems to be the tail that wags the dog for a lot of this stuff.
Well, with respect to code enforcement, which we have quite a bit here, that is one of the hot topic issues. So many people believe that the parking space that's located in front of their property
Is theirs.
is theirs.
Yeah, well, yeah, I got a neighbor that's, anyway, I'm not sure that that's the correct assumption. I think that's a public parking space.
Yeah.
And, while I understand that, people feel entitled to it, but if they lived in Santa Monica again, it would be a high holy day if the curb in front of their own house was available. They would,
It's parked.
they would, so, I mean,
Well, but I think there's a happy medium between our current parking regime overnight and Santa Monica, so,
But I mean, I'm with you. I think it's wholly ridiculous that we somehow want to keep the street completely eradicate cars on it.
there may be a reason. There may, the
Well, you're
police.
gonna get all kinds of reasons, from safety to like, then you can tell who's
Then,
coming there for nefarious reasons versus, if you had to see a
and my
car.
next question would be, tell me how you enforce it and tell me how often you enforce it. Because if it's important, then you would enforce it.
yeah, well, I think the thing is, if you talk about parking in the canyon or on narrow streets,
That's-
that makes plenty of sense, but,
Right, that's the red zone.
on my street, it's huge wide road.
Yep.
And people could park on both sides and you could drive around just fine.
Right.
And, there's like 3 cars that park there overnight. Now, I don't know if they have stickers or they just risk it, but
But that's, there are plenty of people who park overnight on the street in this town. And we assume that each and every one of them has filed with the police department and have a right to do that. And actually, if you want it, you're supposed to print something out and tape it to your window if it's
one night, yeah.
if it's a single night. When I get up and run early in the morning, I see those very rarely. But, okay, you've already got people parking on the street. It doesn't seem to have created a nuisance, so, I mean, I'm just kind of curious, like,
Well, you
What's the
know
agenda?
that during the holidays, we waive that rule.
Yeah.
Because if you have people visiting, they can park on the street, and it doesn't seem to create
But
There's
mayhem.
also, there's
No, and it makes sense.
an
It makes sense.
economic disincentive, like, having bought many of those things online, at one point, not that long ago, they were like $1. Now it's like, no, it's like 7 or 8.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well,
per
good.
day.
Where's that money
But
going?
whereas, well, it's a third part. I don't know who.
Really?
Yeah,
Does it
you.
come to the city?
Well, I don't know. It probably does, but a third party administers it. It's not the city running it. But whereas like a yearly pass sticker is like
$95.
very affordable
95.
versus
Yeah, I think it is.
$8. You just do the math. It's
Right.
like 10 nights and
Yeah.
I got one
But
20-something years
I-
ago.
I-
it was
I-
$50, so.
I'm with you.
I'll have one for my
I would
truck.
love to know what the thinking is.
Won't fit
because-
anywhere in my garage.
I mean, if there, if there's, it's something that if it's important to the
It's not-
city and it's something that they're actively enforcing and they're working on, then yeah, it should be. Because quite honestly, outside the canyon and the red zone, I'm not aware, and I kind of drive around and look around a lot. I mean, and I remember the days when Mike McGee drove the street sweeper around, and you want everybody off the street so they could sweep the streets and have some kind of control.
I
Okay,
mean,
cool.
I would much rather, in the big picture, have all these garages be ADUs rather than storage or parking your 2 cars off-site. And if you could park your cars on the street curb, and then this becomes to me, I think it's ridiculous.
I think,
I mean, maybe there's a happy medium, but I think
maybe in
it's
20 years, that's gonna be our future, but I think it's worth the discussion today.
I think it'll be much sooner than that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I know that under our current housing element, we have to do another amnesty program to encourage ADUs. And the next round is gonna be much tougher for us, so.
See, so that's what I mean, we're mandating cars off the street into space that could be utilized for this. So why not, where it's applicable, I mean, I get above the red line or whatever, doesn't work, but there are a lot of streets down where,
But even when we mandate them off the street, it doesn't mean people park them in the garage. It means they
No,
park
I
them in the
know.
driveway, and
I have a long driveway and I have a garage, but my
Which
car has
is
never been
fine.
inside my garage.
I don't,
I'm not gonna admit that, even though it's true.
I don't know.
Okay, so
But-
where do we wanna go? We've got a commercial subcommittee already. It was me and you and Gina. So we lost Gina. Do we wanna take on another? Somebody wanna join up?
I would, but I'm on another subcommittee that we haven't got off the ground, so I don't know
And I'm with,
The
if
hillside.
that one
I'm
went
with
to
him.
sleep or
Yeah.
what.
Yeah, I think this is sort of more pressing, but however we wanna do it.
well, as long as we don't have two really active or busy at the same time, I wouldn't have a problem.
Okay. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's, the three of us can round up and take a cut at this, and then, also, I don't know if you have seen the amendments we recommended for the commercial code, so that's, those dovetail together, so you can take a look at that.
Okay, yeah. I may have to re-up, get another copy.
Now, are you gonna look at the residential side of it too, or just?
Well, I think if we're looking at the parking code, we should look at the parking code.
Yeah.
I mean, it's-
Chairman Hutt.
Yeah.
So on this subcommittee, you wanted to have 3 people, you said?
Yeah.
The only problem with that is under the Brown Act, right? If you have,
Down somebody.
That's
Yeah.
right.
so if
This
you
is a commission of 7, and right now we have 6.
have 6. Well, I've never been in a situation where there's not
Even
an odd
numbers?
number, yeah.
Well, it's only because we haven't filled it.
Right, yeah.
Like I said, normally we're 7 and a 3-person
And-
commission could work.
And I believe the city council is going to be filling the additional spot at their next meeting.
Okay.
Good, but Terry said we could, when we talked about a different subgroup, that if we had 6, we could do 3. But if we were down to 5, we had to go to 2.
Well, if they're gonna fill it at the next meeting, that'd be before we really got in gear anyway. So,
We can make the new person be on the commission, on the committee.
Who's, no, we don't know who the new person is yet. When is that meeting?
How the running club operates. You don't show up for a meeting, you're president.
24th, okay, great. That'll be good to have,
That'll work.
one more member.
yeah, I just want to mention one other thing here. That we're talking about the possibility of waiving or modifying some requirements based on affordable housing. Okay, and that's different than ADUs. There's a real issue that's coming to the fore statewide right now in that affordable is a misnomer. It's a numbers game, but they are to be able to afford one of those is a much higher level of income than, say, the people that we think we are, low-income people that we think we are serving by calling it affordable.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a real disparity in there. So if you wanna say, oh well, these are fixed income seniors, or these are poor people, oh, they don't have cars anyway. No, because if you can afford it, you're probably really up here, and you have a car or two. All right. So I think that we would have to be very, very careful about any idea of like parking relief based on quote unquote affordable.
Affordable units, yeah.
Okay. The new term, incidentally, is workforce housing.
Well,
which is
workforce
more
housing is I mean, that's when you get into the parking game. I mean, the affordable housing thing, there's all sorts of reasons.
Right.
But workforce is the step above affordable, and there's all sorts of gradations to affordable and.
Moderate income.
Yeah, I think that, you know, we've got sort of 2 different things we need to do with regard to affordable units and ADUs and whatnot. And one is we need to keep in mind what we want for our town. And I think we all want to have a town that is inviting to people from different economic backgrounds and has a lot of energy and input, and then we have to comply with the state rules on housing. And those,
very important.
those overlap to some degree, but, you know, sometimes the state stuff is, well, as you said, sort of fun with numbers, so I'll just leave it there.
Right.
Okay, I think that wraps up this discussion. Good. Then we can move on to planning commission reports. Does anybody have any reports? Okay, do we have?
Vincent, do we want to talk about 38 West?
Yes, that was one of the things I was going to bring up. Go ahead. But-
Oh, okay, well, I'll defer to you then, because I think you were more centrally involved with that than I was, so.
Okay.
So, yes, 38 West Sierra Madre Boulevard has new ownership, and you've been noticing some improvements in the courtyard area. They're also in the process of painting the building. I outreached to Joe Catalano to assist in that effort and get his opinion. I think we came to a happy medium. The building is not going to be bright blue as originally proposed or bright yellow. So we wanted something that would blend in with the environment. They are creating a base element. It's not entirely completely pure black, but it is going to read as black, and there are some sample storefronts that are painted that way, the window frames. We will also revisit the storefronts that face Sierra Madre Boulevard to see if we want to introduce the field color into those storefronts and some of the panels that are there. But we did allow them to move forward with painting all the corridor storefronts this inkwell color, and they were going to be putting in red doors as well.
Cool.
So they're moving forward with that renovation.
Cool. Are there specific new tenants coming in, or is it just renovating this?
So just renovating the building, cleaning it up a bit.
And do we, is there any update on the tea house?
So 94 North Baldwin Avenue, we have not heard from them for a while. We have their plan check in the office. All they needed to do was swap out a few sheets, and they never came back. So I'm assuming that there might be some financial concerns with the property owner.
And is there an update on the new restaurants? I know the Thai place was switching over to, was it a burger place?
It's a burger place, and I'm kind of surprised why they were planning to open up much sooner, actually, I think in July. And now it's just kind of stalled. The other restaurant was shut down by the county.
The Middle Eastern one that had, was that,
Lemon Zest.
that was some sort of,
They didn't get all the permits that were required by the county, and I guess they did additional work than just renovating what they had.
but the new bakery coffee bars opened in in what used to be salon, so
Nail salon.
there we go.
Hey, and I'm pleased to see, talking about complication with parking requirements, I'm pleased to see that the dance studio is finally opened up.
Yes.
Right in one of Congregational's
But
buildings.
they're using the parking lot for the church.
For the church.
That was part of the deal, wasn't
That's
it?
part of the deal, and
Well,
that's where
anyway.
shared parking really makes things happen.
And that's a perfect example of how you can, you know, instead of having a separate parking for each use, you can reuse parking.
I'm glad to see after all the struggle that they're in.
Yeah.
They're operating.
And that's one of the things, getting back to the commercial code update, that, you know, the way we had proposed, they wouldn't have had to
Right.
jump
That's-
through that hoop.
That's
so.
correct.
I also just wanted to point it out for 251 Rancho Road. If you recall, we reviewed that and approved that project in one meeting. We appointed a subcommittee of one person, and we sent that exhibit out, different options, to Manish. And
We had a winner.
he identified a winner. You can pass that around. So basically, the discussion was to possibly consider hip roofs at the two outer flanking wings and introduction of a board and batten siding in the center volume of that space, so it ties together with the existing structure on the street front. So that was,
No, that looks nice.
I would add the applicant actually did a lot of work, providing like 4 different versions.
Okay.
So
Right.
it's good.
That, I don't think we specified what our subcommittee for One Carter review, is Joe and Manisha are standing subcommittee on that, right? Good, okay. I'm
That's
good to
fine.
volunteer.
And the new guy.
And the new guy.
We have a good track record
Or
so
gal.
far. We're 1-0, so let's see.
Yeah. No, I think the one on One Carter that we did approve, that we had a few,
Craftsman, or the-
yeah, we had a few tweaks, really looked good, so I appreciate that. Okay. Is there,
we do have 2 projects for our next meeting on October 3rd.
okay,
One of them is a new One Carter project, Lot 25, which is the first lot as you
On the
drive up
right-hand
on the
side.
right-hand side.
Ooh,
That's a
very
prominent
visible.
lot. And I believe the commission at one point has seen this before, because I had seen public notices. We
Oh,
can't
yeah.
locate
Yes.
the staff reports, but it was Craftsman, and what I had heard, it was close to receiving approval, and then the whole project was changed hands.
I remember it.
Okay, so I think you're gonna like it again.
Okay. The deal was it was very visible from the street,
right.
from 2 streets.
And we have another addition, rear addition, second floor addition, and rear addition at the ground level as well, that we'll be looking at, fairly large property as well.
Okay, great. Anything else? Okay, we stand adjourned until October 3rd.